the other you've taken part in. Can both of you kind of talk a little bit about just how the internal test runs have gone and the mock you had with the league on Monday, and what challenges, what are the biggest challenges you face as far as just in communication or just disseminating information among yourselves as well? Any apprehension there?
Who would you like to speak to, Mike or me?
Both of you, please.
I can. You want me to take it, Jerry?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Sure. I tell you, I mean, the process has been, going strong for 3 weeks, and I give our IT department, so much credit for keeping us updated with new instruments, just to make sure we're able to communicate thoroughly. And it's been very productive. So we're all, in our homes. So we've been spending a lot of time going through, each and every prospect. So it's given us a chance to take a couple laps through the draft board. So especially for the first time going through it with Jerry and Steven and the personnel staff, it's been very, very organized. Been very impressed.
I'll go from here on it as well. Actually, I'm watching, as you are, Mike, and this is probably the least quality reception that I've experienced, and we've possibly as a group experienced in the last 2 weeks. And right now, this seemingly restricted delivery on the picture, but I think it's gone seamless. This today, hooking Steven in is one of the rare occasions, but still, I think it is seamless. We've had most of the time, we would have the screen full of scouts and coaches, and we would be having them make presentations on players, asking questions on presentations. There was not a lot of over talk. There was when a scout is featured, a coach is featured, he's on the screen as I am. I assume I am with you, and you get a good, clear picture. I'll be very candid with you. We've been doing this now for over 2 weeks, and we've been through initially the time that just the scouts usually spend, but we've had our coaches and we've had everybody involved in that run, and then we've had the specific run that we normally have this week, going through all the players in the draft. This, as frankly, is the most thorough that I can remember having all of this information. It seems that it's presented in a real orderly way. It's brought out the best order in us. Everybody's succinct in their presentations. Everybody is clear on the type of questions. So I think it's been a good process, and I'm very comfortable that we know as of this minute everything that we would have expected to know about every player.
And now we'll go ahead and take a question from Clarence Hill.
Jerry and Mike, I have a question for both of you guys, but Jerry first, can you just talk about being a part of Trump's economic reopening team and what that means to you? And Mike, I want to ask you about the virtual offseason program and what is Dak Prescott missing? How much would he miss if he's not going to be there?
No, I'll speak to the first one, but to be able to do whatever perspective I have and contribute to the gathering of that information, the time that I've communicated and been, if you will, on the phone with so many of some of the top minds and people around the country. Everybody has the real attitude of what can we do, how can we do. We don't have all the answers. It was particularly informative of me to hear all of the other people that the president included and talking about, again, from their vantage point, from their point, first of all, what can we do to mitigate health losses and mitigate the health issues, and then certainly what we can do at that point to basically keep our economy as productive or as stable as it can possibly be under circumstances, and then how do we get back? It was a great exchange. I got a lot of information from it myself, and hopefully was able to contribute in some small way as to my ideas.
I would say to this that we all pretty much very much understand the sensitive times that we're in, and really the health and the welfare of everybody is at the forefront of our thinking. And then with this, professionally able to start the virtual program. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, my bad. Continue on, I'm sorry.
Are you asking a question or am I up?
No, go ahead, continue on about Dak.
Dak and the rest of our players, we started our virtual off-season program yesterday. Feedback last night was very positive. Actually, we're just concluding day 2 pretty much as we speak. All players have been given the iPads, and and the voluntary sessions have got off to a great start.
Now we'll go ahead and go on over to Todd Archer.
Jerry and Mike, can you talk about how your free agency and what you've been able to do there, has that closed any avenues or opened things up to what you guys might do this weekend in the draft, and where you think your roster is heading into Thursday in the first round specifically?
I think we did specifically address some areas that give us some slack, if you will, as far as need in several positions, even our kicker. But having said that, I think that let's just take our defense, let's take our defensive front pressure. Even though those were interior guys, with the exception of Smith, of course, is a pretty dynamic force on the outside. I think we've done some things that will in and of itself, apart from positioning for a draft, but in and of itself has improved us on the defensive side of the ball. And I think we were fortunate and we did a good job of financially fitting it in with our responsibility that we have, or our credence to the cap, and lets us have a good avenue to go into the draft with, as well as financially meet what we need to this year regarding our salary cap.
We'll go to George.
This question is for Jerry and Mike both as well. Thanks for your time today. Similar to Todd's question, but specifically with the defense, where do you feel your roster stands now versus a few weeks ago, and what can you tell us about the defensive scheme, since both of you have mentioned, one, that it will change, and two, Mike, you told us in Indy, I want to be better at defense at this stop than I was at my last.
Well, I think, number one, just with the players that we've added to the existing roster, will give us a chance to shift gears as far as the scheme changes that we see ourselves making compared to how we played here in the past. So, we'll continue to develop that. Frankly, just being in day 2 of the virtual meetings, the players are really just getting introduced to, what the expectations are and the basics of the new defensive system. So, I'm excited about the additions we have. And I'm real excited about the players that we have here. I think it's going to be a very good blend. And then with the new draft class and getting these guys all together, I think we can take a big step.
We'll now go to Calvin Watkins.
This question is from Mike and one for Jerry. Mike, since the combine, the world has changed and you got a new job, how have things been for you? Have you found a place to stay? Have you talked to your family? And obviously you have to get this job going. How difficult has this been for you?
Well, I mean, it's been an adjustment. Very exciting times, obviously, to be part of the Dallas Cowboys, and as a family, we're very excited. But I think, like everybody, the times that we're in is at the forefront of our thinking and focus, and so the ability to be with your family is the priority that we're all partaking in right now. But as was stated earlier, the fact that we've been able to spend as much time professionally with the virtual setups that has been set up has really prepared us for the draft.
All right, now we will go to Mike Ducey. Mike? Go ahead, Mike. No, Mike? All right, we will try Rob Phillips. Rob Phillips?
Hi, this question's for Coach McCarthy. Coach, good afternoon. I was wondering how you would evaluate your center position right now that Travis is retiring, how you feel about the current options you have on your roster to replace him.
I think Travis is a player that's had a great career, obviously, and to be commended on that. But we look at our current depth at the offensive with the offensive line group. I think you start off with Joe Looney in the two corners. So I think we got great competition, great depth. You got Marcus Henry there, also Adam Redmond. So we have some really good flexibility. Got really good numbers. So the fact that we're able to get started and just start going through the language and how we're going to call things. I think the fact that we have that much experience with the veteran group that we have here, I feel very good about moving forward.
All right, for the next question, we will go to Jane Slater. Go ahead, Jane.
Guys, thanks for doing this. I just wanted to get some clarity, Mike, on something you said earlier. So was Dak Prescott participating in those virtual chats would be my first question. And as a new coach, how hard is it when you haven't really had face-to-face time with a lot of these players to sort of get them to buy in not only to you and your new coaching staff, but some of the system that you're putting in?
Well, as I would say, as I have throughout my whole coaching career, I think we all recognize these are voluntary opportunities for our players. But there's been a ton of enthusiasm, Dak included, as far as the distribution of information. We're in obviously a different time right now. So, for instance, we had a number of guys kind of going through some trial and error with the communication systems that we've put in place with our coaches and our players. But we're off to a very good start. As I stated earlier, this is day 2, and the fact that we're able to communicate and I know the feedback has been very positive this last night visiting with the coaches.
And just real quick, Coach, so was Dak in the virtual chat or not? I just want to make sure we all get that right. We're not tweeting something erroneous after this conversation.
I think the most important thing to remember is, regardless of who the player is, and I understand why you're asking the question. I mean, we don't do roll call publicly, but Dak has been, he's been part of it as far as the communication with the coaches.
So how should we characterize that then?
Characterize it as I'm not going to do roll call on any player, as these are voluntary sessions. But like I stated, we feel really good about all of our players in the contact that they've had with the position coaches.
Awesome. Like I said, not trying to be contentious, so you can't see me here. I just want to make sure we're getting the right information across.
Yeah, I think I've given you the answer. I'm not sure what you're asking, Jane.
All right, now we'll try Ed Werder.
Jerry, assuming you find it counterproductive for your quarterback to count $31.6 million against the cap, can you give us an update on where you stand relative to finishing a multi-year deal with Dak? And is there any indication about when he might sign his tender?
I don't have a time frame. It's not in a list of priorities, as you could imagine, with everything that we all are dealing with, as well as what we're doing with the draft. So I don't have a time frame, but I'm not concerned about that at all as to any of those issues. And again, No surprises here, no surprise on the amount that the franchise counts against the draft, and no surprise that we're sitting here relative to where we are without a long-term agreement. What is the issue here and the challenge is how do we have communication with everyone and do the best we can with what we've got and what the league is doing. To be fair to everyone, what the league is doing as it pertains to getting our team ready, Dak's very much a part of that.
Right. Next up, we'll go to Mike Fisher. Mike, hold on one second. My chat window just went away to be able to unmute you. So, having some issues here. I'm sorry, guys. There you go. Mike, thanks for waiting. Sorry about that. Go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. One quickie for Mike. Mike, if you're involved in building a board, do you rank him just this, the grade on this guy, he's there, or do you press it up a little bit by saying, listen, we're not taking a quarterback here, therefore let's not put him that high. And Jerry Jones, I might ask, not naming any names and understanding that it could be a pipe dream, how viable is it to trade pick number 17 for a superstar veteran from another team?
I'm sorry, Mike, you were going in and out. I didn't grab the whole question. Was that for me or was that for Jerry? I'm going to start off.
Yeah, for Mike, when you're building your board, do you just rank them with their grades, or do you say, oh, we're not taking a quarterback, so don't put him that high, for instance?
Well, no, when you do the draft board, you rank it the same every year. I think it's important to always put a grade that fits to the historical process of grading every player by position, because you spend a lot of time in this league doing comparables and how players line up to each other. And I think it definitely helps up when you're trying to weigh value from one position to the next, and also the value from one round to the next. So I think it's important to grade the player by position, even at the quarterback position, the same as you would each and every year.
Okay, Mike, I'll answer the second part of your question to me, because at this time of the year, draft pick values are heightened because all of the teams in the NFL want to pick and want to use that pick to pick a player for now and in the future, and one that's salary cap friendly. So the idea of trading a very valuable, your number one, for a existing player that more than likely is going to cost you a lot more is unlikely. And I would say just theoretically it is, but I'd say specifically it is. Highly unlikely that we wouldn't have the pick there to use for either a top player in the draft or to trade for potential other draft picks where you can equate the value more evenly pick for picks. Then you're likely to have something happen like that, but probably unlikely to make a draft pick trade for an established star.
Next, we'll go to Nick Eatman. Nick? All right, apparently we're having troubles with Nick. We'll go ahead and try Skylar Dixon.
Hey, Mike, on the question of whether players are participating in the virtual offseason, is it any more vital right now with it being virtual versus if you actually had guys with you? In other words, If it were a traditional off season, would it be more critical for guys to be there because you've got them in front of you, or is it just as critical with them missing virtually?
Well, I think we all understand the times that we're in, and also the situation of the newness of the direction we're going, with the coaching change. So, yeah, it's definitely important, and that's why, we're fortunate that we've been able to get off to, a really good start here these last 2 days.
All right, we will try Nick Eatman again. Nick, go ahead. Nope, still no Nick. All right. We will switch over then to Michael Gelkin. Michael, go ahead.
Thanks, guys. I wanted to ask you about some of the procedural challenges the COVID-19 pandemic invites. There's two questions as part of that. One is, what system do you have in place to manage the frenzy that is signing undrafted free agents on Saturday? And then secondly, what's the outlook as of today, while acknowledging the difficulty of forecasting into late July? What is the outlook today about a training camp in California, in Oxnard? Is that something that you guys have had to rethink how that is set up and whether or not the team makes that trip at all?
I'll answer that. I'm very comfortable. We've really only had one real league-wide dress rehearsal, and that was yesterday. When we had glitches, one of the keys to me was to have backups to execute trades or execute the business of the draft. We had that. We exercised that. We used backups. We handled circumstances that could possibly happen during the draft, on the draft board. I thought that was handled very well. As it turns out, we had one happen right in the middle of our selection, and we were in the middle of a trade. And so the bottom line is we've rehearsed that. I'm very comfortable that the technical capability is very much here to have an exciting, if you will, if there's not only an efficient and not only one that has complete fairness in it. I think it will also allow for the, if you will, the creativeness of trades. I think all of that is there, and I'm comfortable that between the work we've done, getting our drafts ready throughout the league, but certainly the Cowboys, which is really the only one I can speak to, that we're going to be able to do the kinds of things we've always done on draft day.
Now we will go to Brad Sham.
Jerry, the trades is what I was interested in you talking about. Can you say any more about the logistics of how that will all work given the circumstances?
We have the ability to take incoming calls from all 30 teams, take them as they come in. As you know, those usually happen right as you're picking or right before you're picking. Is when your lines heat up or your interest heats up. We have the ability, this by the way would be in my mind the most chaotic part of a draft, and we have the ability to handle those. We have the ability to spread out the handling of those among several members of our staff. We have the ability to figure the trades and share that with each other as we're on the clock. We have, that's very doable, and the communication between us in the draft room is excellent. We have the ability to communicate. I have direct line with Mike. I have direct line with Stephen. We have direct lines with each other. We can see what moving down, the risks and the players we might miss to move down, whether that's justified as to what we need. We have the ability to do all of those things. And of course, that's the exercise that was going on in all the drafts of the past that I've been involved in.
All right, we'll go back to David Moore.
First, for Jerry, if you could start every year, you kind of tell us, looking at a draft, what your anticipation or expectation is as far as the ability to get a day one starter that can walk in, or maybe you could get a couple of starters. Can you talk about that? And then Mike, after he answers, could you kind of give us your impression of what you think of this draft as far as quality in the defensive line and also in the secondary, as far in terms of quality and draft, quality depth? If you could answer that after Jerry talks about the overall prospects.
Well, as you know, we don't have multiple picks in each round, not one through, we may have two in one round, but be that as may, not an early round. And so, but I like our 17th hole. I like the spot we're in at 17. There's quality without a question at very, very accretive to the Dallas Cowboys. There's quality players there and should be there in each round. On the other hand, there's quality enough players there that could excite a trade, and that would be someone coming to you to give you more value. And then once you've made that trade, as I said earlier, there looks like depth in positions in this draft that you would have those players there. We all remember the Frederick trade, where we were there. We didn't have someone right there that we thought justified the pick. We traded it down, picked up enough to get Williams, the receiver, netted that out of the deal, and got Frederick. That circumstance is possible if you can in any way look at the makeup of the draft and predict that, which you really can't, but there's enough here to work with.
Right, we will go to Todd Archer. Todd, go ahead.
I guess, Jerry, I was wondering, with the new coaching staff, what have you been able to glean about them during this draft process? How have they been able to interact and be involved in this? And then for Mike, if you can kind of talk about the differences in the Cowboys draft process as to what you had for those years in Green Bay, and just kind of discuss the differences between the two organizations.
I want to give Will Clay a lot of credit here. Will structures this thing so that, and really works it so that he can get serious influence and input from the coaching staff. As you know, coaches don't spend the majority of their time evaluating these college players. Your scouts do that. On the other hand, Will is able to structure it so that we do really not only encourage, but really give and put together a outline so that the coaches can really not only evaluate, but present the information and meld that with the scouts' information so that you have a meld, you have not a consensus, don't confuse that, but you sure have that kind of input, which is different. It's much different. One's obviously mostly from tapes with, I'm talking coaches, they did see him at the combine a lot of times. So that combination and the seriousness that you incorporate that in your evaluation is the thing. We're serious about it. And yes, we've got some great coaches. I think we've got a total of 5 former head coaches here. But we've got some great coaches in here, and I was very impressed over the last several weeks with their involvement, and not involvement, but just their approach. They are on the incentive plan. It's called wanting to have players that they can coach and win ball games. So I've been very impressed. Mike has done an unbelievable job of leading the charge with those coaches, and just basically is for me such a fresh look at how to approach not only the draft, but how to approach and a perspective of the team. All of that has been taking place, and I'm really proud that we're getting the work done. We're done. Do it.
And to finish, really, I think it's only natural that you'll have some similarities and differences between any two organizations. I think, from a scouting department, standpoint, I think, like to echo Jerry's comments on Wilmer Clay, I think he's done a phenomenal job with the process and coordination, both the scouts and the coaches working together, and and then really these last few days with the leadership group of Jerry, Stephen, and myself and Will going back through this list has been unique to my experience.
All right, before we go to the next question, just a quick little update. We do have Stephen on the call with us now, so you can feel free to ask him questions as you see fit. And now we'll go to Calvin Watkins.
Yeah, this is for Jerry. What's your confidence level in the fact that Aldon Smith and Gregory could be reinstated by the league?
And again, when you want that from Stephen?
Whoever.
You're just on time. Hit 'em.
Go ahead.
Well, we certainly, Alden has been in the process of re-entering as an active player of the NFL for several months now. And I would say that firsthand that I know that he is very diligent in his work, in his consulting, and in his work to do the things that the NFL looks at to reinstate. It was important to us. Mike can speak for himself, but he got to, he visited personally with Alden while they were out in California. And in these types of things, it's always important to everybody look eye to eye and see where we are with our conscientiousness. And so that's important. Mike can speak to that for himself. But I wouldn't dare, as you can imagine, I wouldn't dare get into because of where the league is and how they will go about this process for both of those players. On the other hand, I will say this, as a league, we really are bent toward the medical aspect of many of these problems, or many of these things that have been in consideration when a player has to have some type of suspension. Well, one of the things that we've done with the collective bargaining agreement is make it more medically oriented, to where you can basically have good grades from doctors that you really are on a path of improvement, and that weighs into being a player in the NFL, and more so than just totally a test. And that's important. That's where we're going with this thing under the new collective bargaining agreement, and those guys have certainly adhering to those tests in their rehab effort.
I will go to Joe Trahan. Joe? Are you there? Oh. All right, we will go back to Jory. Jory?
Mike, you spoke to us in January about whether you were going to change the language of the offense and how much you were going to keep of the offensive principles. What's the latest update that you could tell us now about where you are in terms of merging your experience with what the Cowboys had in place?
Well, I think really the most important part of the transition is bringing everything together from a language standpoint. We were trying to capture as much similar terminology as we possibly can. It's going to be a different offense, but we want to make sure that we build off of the conceptual success that was in place. Not only just what Dak has done, but with the offensive line and Zeke, and what Amari, what has been established here. So we want to carry over as much as we can. But as far as the transition into the style of offense we want to play, that's what we're working on right now.
All right, Clarence. Clarence, go ahead.
Hey, Mike, this is Clarence Hill. Can you talk about the biggest need for this team heading into the draft? And specifically, can you talk about this new defensive scheme? Will there be a 4-3-3-4 multiple, and how that relates to defensive ends and edge rushers you target in the draft?
Well, I think the biggest thing, going back to our first conversations when I had a chance to sit down with the whole media group, is, you know, we want to make sure we acquire as many good football players we possibly can. I don't want to just be general there. You know, we're not just, you know, trying to lock into we need a certain player, certain profile, because, you know, we have an outstanding scouting department. They have these players ranked, and it's important for us to trust our board and acquire good players. And I always go back to my experience in 2010, where, you know, when we won the Super Bowl, it took 77 players to win that Super Bowl. So you never have enough good players. And I think with the defense falling into the classification of a 4-3 defense, but, you know, pass rushers come in different forms and fashions. And it's important for us as a defensive staff to make sure that we can make each and every individual successful. You know, we're not just drafting people to play one technique, so forth. We want to take advantage of these individuals as we bring them into our program.
All right, we'll go to Ed Werder.
Jerry and Steven, you guys have never been separated from each other during a draft in terms of time when the decisions were being made, much less now being separated from your head coach as well. Just wondering how challenging will it be to get all the information and points of view that you need to build a consensus, and then who ultimately, you know, makes that final decision?
You know, Ed, it's been amazingly productive and efficient working virtually with these draft meetings. And, you know, if anything, I think you don't have any distractions because you're sitting there alone, really on point with what's going on in the meeting. And I think we can be very efficient and very effective in terms of communicating with one another, whether it's Jerry with Will, Mike, and myself all in one room, whether one meeting room or meeting, you know, with one of us on the phone. We have our lines to one another. I think all that, if that's the way it turns out, can be productive. And I think everybody can have their opinions. We're going to have, as usual, our medical opinions, our, you know, our ways that we go about our off the field work. We'll have those, you know, obviously at a point where we feel really good about them. And then, you know, at the end, how it always works is Jerry will put all that in his computer, and he ultimately makes the final call.
Ed, this is Jerry. I don't know if this will overlap Stephen here, but one of the things that I'm not going to miss is when I came out of those draft rooms for the weekend, my old shins used to have big old bruises on them. And that's from Stephen kicking me under the table for 3 straight days relative to some of our decision making. And I know we've got a serious conference here, but I think I'm going to kind of miss that physical punching that goes on for old Stephen. Well, you shouldn't. I told him one time, I asked where he got his strength when he was 16 years old. He had his uncle down, about to killed him, choked him, a big boy, the uncle. And I said, I don't feel that when I'm wrestling you. And he said, well, you don't squeeze your daddy as hard as you can. So the point is, I'm going to miss a little of that punching around on the table as we're conducting this draft.
Other thing I would add is just it's 99% of the time that there's a pretty obvious consensus as to who should be picked. And, you know, every now and then you got a little bit of dissent one way or the other, and a little division in terms of one or maybe even two wanting to go one way, even two wanting to go one way, but that's very rare. And, you know, when that happens, that's when Jerry comes into play. But, you know, we're working really hard. That's what we've been doing for 2 weeks, is really trying to build a consensus, not only with our overall board, but ultimately getting to a point where we'll have a consensus when it's our time to either make a trade or move back, move up, or pick a player.
Now we'll go to David Hellman. David? All right, we will try Jane Slater. Go ahead, Jane.
Guys, okay, so I think the challenge of this is sort of just making sure we have clarity on a certain thing, on a couple of things that have popped up. So you're not clarifying if you guys have a 4-3 or 3-4 defensive scheme, because it sounds like you didn't want to necessarily come out and clarify that or not. So I just want to ask that question. So Mike, you can answer that one if you don't mind. And then my next one would be, Jerry also referenced that you went out to California and met Alvin Smith in person. I'm kind of curious what your impressions of him were during that meeting.
Well, the clarification for your first question is we're a 4-3 defense. I'm just talking about specific body types and the versatility of the different body types to play a pass rushing role. So we may have the ability to have some variation there, was really the point that I was making. And as far as the second part of your question, I had the opportunity to meet Alden Smith in December. I was out there on a personal nature, and very impressed, with Alden and everything that he's done and his path, and he's really prepared himself for this next opportunity. So I always admired him from afar, competing against him in the old days, a few years back, but very impressive young man. Looking forward to working with him.
We'll go to Michael Gelkin.
Thank you. Once the draft is complete, undrafted rookies is a rapid process involving a number of moving pieces. This involves coaches and scouts alike. That's difficult enough to manage when everyone's in the same room. I wanted to ask the reality of what that looks like this year on Saturday night. What system do you guys have in place to create as much of a coordinated and organized effort as you can, given those challenges?
Why don't you grab that one? Please.
What question was that? I'm sorry.
Signing undrafted rookies on Saturday night is typically a very fast-moving process with a lot of moving pieces that is exacerbated when nobody's in the same room. What system do you guys have in place to create an organized, coordinated effort where everyone's on the same page to adapt and sign all those undrafted rookies?
Well, I don't think it's going to be as big a challenge as you might think. A lot of these negotiations are going on outside of the same room anyway, and I think it's going to work very effectively doing it virtually. Really, we treat the war room as kind of the clearinghouse, but we have assistant coaches with contract negotiators / scouts that are doing the work, and we're going to have the same system in terms of how we rate our free agents and in terms of the money that we actually spend and the guarantees that we actually give to these college free agents. We think we have a great system in place that we have a lot of confidence in. And I don't see that it's going to be that big of an issue because the communication that we've been able to have on these WebEx meetings and interaction that we're able to have has been very efficient. So I think we're going to be very productive in college free agency. I'm going to be very surprised if we have a lot of glitches in it and, feel like that we've really put a priority on it, going back many, many years ago and feel like that we can get this done and get it done in a quality way.
Right. Calvin Watkins.
Yeah, this is for Stephen and Jerry. How much does your contract talks with Dak influence what you might do in the draft at that position? I know you guys always want that backup quarterback or the number 3 guy to be a young guy, developmental guy, and it's.
Well, I think you may have answered. I'll answer the first part of it. You may have answered your question there, Calvin. We always the philosophy we have as to Dak's contract will be the same as it always has been. And we like to be developing a young quarterback. That's always great. I would like to have one that would develop to the level that would be somebody that you could trade and build asset that way. Mike can speak to it. He wants a certain number of quarterbacks in the building, ideally, to be working with. One of the things that Mike brings is, frankly, a real good background, really good background with developing quarterbacks and working with quarterbacks, and is a very, very astute coaching perspective of what makes a good quarterback for what we hope to be this team for years to come. In other words, I'm looking forward to being able to develop quarterbacks with Mike as coach. And so all of that weighs into, let's make sure we've got somebody here or somebodies that are getting those snaps that are precious, whether they're in preseason, whether they're in practice, or whether they could be in a ball game. Make sure those snaps are going to somebody that's got the future in mind, along with doing what it needs to do to win the ball game if we should not have Dak in there.
I don't think at the end of the day, I don't think us drafting a quarterback has anything to do with Dak. He's going to be our starting quarterback, and obviously he's franchised. And our bigger goal is to get him signed long term, and we think we can do that. But as Jerry said, Mike has been the head coach for many years of an organization that really I think is the template of how to do the quarterbacks the right way, and I'll certainly let Mike speak to that. But we've had a lot of conversations about it, and certainly if you can develop these quarterbacks, they're great assets for an organization in terms of trade pieces. If you develop them and they have success, which obviously they did up in Green Bay and did it well. So certainly it's a situation that we've looked at in the past in terms of drafting them, but I think Mike's going to have a great influence on us here in terms of what we may do going forward at the quarterback position. But I'll let Mike speak to his experience with it.
Yeah, I think the stating the obvious, the quarterback position is the most important. Obviously, we have a lot of love there, great love for Dak. But if you go back to Ron Wolf in the early 90s and what was established, the ability to keep the most important position in football and develop that room, that quarterback room, and you can see the value not only it has to your football team if the starter is injured, but also the value it can bring to your football team as those younger quarterbacks move on.
We'll go to Todd Archer.
Hi, guys. This is for all three of you guys. How big of a must is getting a cornerback and getting a cornerback early with Byron Jones' departure?
I don't consider, when you say how big, it's show me the draft board. Show me where we are, what we're doing at that particular time. Show me what you're offering me for that pick. And if there's a corner there, I'll show you we'll show you how big a must it is. The point is, the only way to answer that is to hindsight after we've decided whether or not the value is there at that pick or whether or not we pass or select a cornerback.
Anybody else want to answer that?
I agree with what Jerry said. I just think it all depends on the board. We try to every year in free agency do what we need to do to feel good about our team, regardless of what we pick in the draft. And I think we've done a good job of that. I've always said player acquisition is 365 days a year. It's a lot more than just the draft. So we'll, we just don't feel, the pressure to have to take a certain position early.
All right, we will go to David Moore.
Yeah, Mike, just circling back from earlier, can you talk a little bit about, again, your assessment of what this class looks like, especially in the first maybe 3 rounds as far as defensive ends and defensive secondary, and do you feel good about the ability to potentially come out of that if you choose to select in those areas, come out with a couple of guys who could either step in or be heavy rotation players for you this upcoming season?
Well, to answer your question about the numbers, I feel good about the numbers at the quarterback position and also the outside defensive rush area position. So, but just not to beat a dead horse here, but I think it's important just to continue up with both Jerry and Steven said. It all based on the value of where you are and what's on the board at that time. So, but I do feel that there are very good numbers in both those areas.
Jerry or Steven, did you have anything to add to that? If not, that was the last question. Unfortunately, we do have to get going.
I'm all good.
All right. Well, thank everybody for their time. We really appreciate it. And hopefully if we meet like this again, we'll have all the little kinks worked out. We'll see you guys later in the week. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.